Hello, Karen.
Hi, how are you today?
Very good, very good. And we have our moderators, Candy Sheehan. Candy, this is
Hi,
Karen, Dr. Wiseman. And
Karen.
Karen, this is a pleasure to have you as our guest today. We go live every Saturday, and our audience is very diverse. So we
Okay.
have people who are mature audience, maybe even seniors. We also have people who are much younger. And Candy Sheehan and I, we were originally designers, and Scott, my husband, Scott Kiddle, we started this program back in April when
Oh,
we realized, yes, when we realized that the church was closed and we couldn't just really communicate with people. But the main thing and main purpose for this live talk about coping was
yeah.
that people really struggled with coping. And
Yep.
so that's why we decided that was the perfect time to step in. And we started this actually program back like 3.5 years ago at my church in St. Joseph, Missouri. And
Okay.
yes, and so that was a small group, and we studied a book you probably, of course, know, Richard Rohr. And we studied his book, Falling Upward. And but gradually this group kind of fell off, and then we did not restart it, had different programs, but during COVID we realized that that's time to do something like that. And so in
Yeah.
to our joy, it was a very successful endeavor, and we have every Saturday we have different guests, and Candy and Scott, they ask questions. And I will briefly introduce you to you, Candy, because Candy is our lay leader, as I told you, and
Yeah.
she leads our church toward the brightest future in the midst of COVID. And
No pressure.
Scott, as I, yeah, no,
Wow.
it's true. It's absolutely true. You know how it is. And then Scott is he's my husband, and it was easy for us to start together because we live in the same household, and
There you
that
go.
was safe, right? So that's how we started it. That we did not have to go anywhere, and that's how we started. So,
Yeah.
Karen, I know you for many years. And we had the same class at St. Paul's School of Theology many
That's right.
years ago.
Oh
And
my.
ever since, I was just following you, and you are a very outspoken person. You are a great preacher and a very good theologian. So I thought that it wouldn't be a better person for us today to ask all these questions about where is
Sure.
God in the midst of this pandemic. But
Yeah.
thank you for preparing a program for this. But also, I want to start, as always, asking you to introduce yourself.
All right. Well, I'm Karen Wasmond. I grew up in the United Methodist Church and was a part of the United Methodist Church up until about 6 years ago. I am UCC now, but I pastor at ELCA Church and I teach at an ELCA seminary. So I call myself sort of a denominational mutt. I just have a little bit of several things in me. I grew up in Texas, so that's where my accent is from. We currently live in Philadelphia. I am married and to a social worker, and she works with adults with intellectual disabilities. We have a almost 22-year-old son, which just hurts every time I say it. He is a senior at Temple University. So, we're living in the Northeast, very far away from our families. Both of us have families in Texas and Arkansas, and so we're dealing with that. How do you cope with aging parents from halfway across the country stuff? At the same time, trying to parent our own son into adulthood. So we may talk a little bit about that a little bit later. As Lydia says, she said many years ago, I guess I'll agree, it was many years ago. We were in class at St. Paul's School of Theology, where I got my Master's of Divinity. Later got a Master's of Philosophy and a PhD in Liturgical Studies and Preaching at Drew University. I'm at my current school, which is United Lutheran Seminary in Philadelphia and Gettysburg. I'm in my 11th year here, and I've been at the church for now 5 years. So I love that you used the Poconos zip line photo for the intro. Took this a couple of years ago. I had always said I wanted to learn how to fly. I wanted to zip line and do all kinds of stuff, and maybe even bungee jump off a cliff. And we went to the Poconos, and it's a 4,000-foot zip line. It's one of the longest zip lines on the East Coast, and of course, my wife wouldn't go anywhere near it, but Shelby and I did it, and it was so cool to just fly through the canopy of the trees. And it's just one of those pictures that every time I look at it, I can see the joy in my face, and it reminds me what it felt like to do that. We recently went back to the Poconos for a weekend, and it wasn't the same. It's a lot of the stuff was closed down. We weren't able to do a lot of the things, but that picture, one of my church members had done in I guess it's a 10 by 13 frame, and gave it to me for Christmas, because they said, don't ever lose that, because that's who you are. That spirit and that fun. So
I love this picture here. I love that picture.
It's such a fun picture, because it's me. I got gray hair and my arms flab a little bit, and but at the same time, it's exactly who I am. I'm this person who loves joy and wants to share that with others. So I was very delighted to be invited to come with y'all today.
We're happy to have you, and I want you to know we share something in common. I want to zip line.
There you go.
Not that I have, but I think it would be such a joyful thing. My husband thinks I'm too old. Is there an age limit on that?
There is not. There is not an age limit.
That's what I wondered.
Yeah, I think you can do it at any age.
That's what I'm thinking. Maybe I could do that.
And there are some shorter, smaller zip lines that you can start on, and then maybe move up, or you just go to the top and say, take me down the longest one you got. And literally you just sit there in this apparatus, or this thing that holds you, and the screen goes down and you just fly out. You don't have to leap off. You don't have to
that's what I'm thinking. What could go wrong? If the harness is good, I think I'm safe. I don't think
I've done it now 3 times, and I'm still here to speak about it. So at least it's been safe when I've done it. Yeah. So Lydia had asked me to talk just a little bit, I think, about coping. When we got word, it came first through my wife's work that they were going to shut down for a few weeks. It was the 15th of March. Maybe it was the 13th of March. And we had already been talking as a congregation about the news we were hearing, and thought, gosh, we may not be able to meet for a while. Maybe a couple of weeks. We'll just do something online. We're very lucky as a congregation that we had received a gift about 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago, of a great live streaming situation. We had a person who donated $25,000 to us and said, I can't be in church all the time. I want to be able to see y'all. And we had a guy who worked in this sound and video industry, and he got all kinds of discounts and devices for us. And so we have a 3-camera setup. We've got been doing live stream for about 1.5 years or 2. So when we started, we just knew we would live stream for a couple of weeks, and then we would be back together. That first week, I remember we went down to the chapel because I thought the sanctuary being so full would feel kind of odd. So we went down to the chapel, and we literally filmed it on an iPad and uploaded it to our live stream. And I just sat there thinking, man, that was really awful. Hopefully we'll be back together next week. And this past Sunday was the 33rd Sunday that we have not been gathering as a community. As I said, we're very lucky because we have the live stream. So we've been live streaming since the very beginning. And it goes up on our Boxcast live stream on our website, but we also have it linked to our Facebook. So it goes out to, we sometimes have 300 or 400 connections that sign on with us. And that's more than we would have if people were live in our sanctuary most of the time. So one of the things about coping early on is that we had to just understand that we weren't going to have the answers we wanted. when it went 2 weeks and then 3 weeks, and then we were at 5 weeks, and we still, the state sort of began to shut down. We had to come up with other options. So we started Zooming our Bible study. We Zoomed all of our church meetings. Our staff worked from home, just like a lot of other places. The thing that was interesting for me, though, is as a community of faith, one of the most important things we do together is sit in the same room with each other, right? I mean, we eat together, we pray together, we share, concerns with each other. And when you don't have that, something either has to replace it or it feels kind of lifeless, right? And so I've talked to all kinds of pastors who have been Zooming worship or, doing something like that, or pre-taping worship. And they talk all the time about the fact that it feels kind of disjointed. It feels disassociated from their community. I feel kind of weird too. We have a sanctuary. I'm pointing at the church. Y'all don't know what I'm pointing at, but I'm pointing at my church across the parking lot. We have a sanctuary that seats about 500. And we typically will have about 250, something like that. And when you're looking as far away as I have to look to get to the tech booth where the other humans that are in the sanctuary are with me, it's very isolating. But at the same time, we were doing all of this at the same moment. We weren't pre-taping, we weren't Zooming, which I knew left out a lot of folks who didn't understand Zooming or didn't have a web camera or a microphone for their old laptops and computers. And every single week I started getting emails after. It's like you're talking to us and you're explaining to us how we cope. And what I was saying is, every single Sunday, I know that we're not together in person, but we're together in spirit. I know that you may be sitting and watching from your balcony or from your bedroom or from the coffee table, but we're all in this together. And I would say, I'd ask questions and say, raise your hand from the couch if you agree with me. Every way I could get them to try to participate was important. Of course, one of the big questions then became, we're a community that does communion once a month. We always do it on the first Sunday of the month, and Easter and Christmas Eve and things like that. And the question became really, really important. Do we commune together? How do we commune together? As I said, I teach at a ELCA church, and for the most part, it's pretty strict about how they do communion. You've got to be in the same room. You've got to use elements that have been consecrated in that room. You all eat at the same time. Well, my ELCA church doesn't even have Lutheran in its name. It is as far away denominationally at times than it can be. And I started talking to our leadership. What does communion mean to us? And it was a really important thing. When our discipleship groups gather together, they have communion. When we have a council meeting, we have communion. So it is a huge part of our sort of working and ministry life. It's not just something we do on Sundays, it's at other times. So we made the decision to have folks gather with us on the first Sunday of the month. We'll do that again tomorrow, to have a beverage and some sort of food with them. If that's bread and wine, that's fine. As a Methodist and teaching at a strict ELCA seminary, one of the things that they would have begun to say immediately is it has to be bread. It has to be wheaten bread, and it has to be, juice. And I'm like, get your coffee and a donut. I've sort of let go of some of that stuff just because it's a pandemic. If we have to stick to things just because that's the rule we used to have, I just think that's ridiculous, because we're living in a totally different world right now. Do you know what I mean? Did y'all have some of these same questions about communion, and did you do something different?
We have communion, but we did the prepared kit sets, like communion sets. Yeah. And so we distributed them, people picked them up. And this Sunday we are having, after a month off, we are having in-person service, but kind of a combo. So we have it online and we have it also in the sanctuary. So we'll see how it goes. And so we simply, like Candy, for example, she will be distributing elements from the same tray, like traditional tray for communion, and people, but instead of allowing people to take it, and actually it's very theological, so people need to receive communion.
Yeah.
So Candy will have, and you Candy can say more about that, how you are going to serve it.
It's just, I'm just going to wear a glove and just place it in their hands, you know, and it's already prepackaged in a container. So there should be no, and of course I'll be wearing a mask. So it should be as safe as we can make it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just,
No, go ahead, Lydia.
No, I just wanted to say that if, first of all, for a long time, we tried to preach about the importance and teach about the importance of receiving communion. But of course, every church has it differently done.
Yeah.
And in many churches, people just take it.
Yes.
And so it takes us a while to teach people that you receive it.
Yeah.
But this time, of course, with COVID, you just cannot let it happen that people take it and then another person follows, you know. But so tell us about, and the importance of the community is very important behind that. Yeah.
It's so one of the things that happened is these families that often came up and received it from the pastor and dipped it into one of the cups for intinction from one of the lay leaders are actually serving each other in their homes. And so they're teaching their kids how to bless, you know, how to pray over the elements as I pray over the elements. And you know, I know that there are some who would argue with that theologically or liturgically, and I'm just like, I don't want to hear it. This is what we're doing right now. We may make different decisions at a different time, but right now this is about us gathering around Christ's table, which is the most holy meal of all, and say, everyone who's a part of our community. And we got folks who are watching from across the country, from different denominations, different traditions. And I'm like, you do in your home what you feel comfortable with. This is what we're going to do as a community. And if you do not want to receive or give communion right now in your home, I'm going to bless everybody. And we do that. And it, you know, we got messages. This means so much to be able to have communion. I have some students and some friends who have abstained from communion the entire time. And some of their congregants, they don't understand. They're like, I have not had the Lord's Supper in 8 months. How could you deprive me of this? And it's causing some significant theological and liturgical conversations because, you know, when we receive the meal, and receive is the right word, Lydia, when we receive the meal, it buoys us. It gives us hope. It gives us grace. It's that renewal of our spirit and our heart and our mind to go and live in unity and in communion with the world. And when we don't receive anything, we just keep out pouring and pouring and pouring out of our bodies, and you'll run out. There has to be something. So theologically, what was important to me is that we continued to serve people and to feed people and to nourish people through live worship, through Zoom Bible studies, through community conversations that we have each week, and we pray together and we talk about what's going on. Early on, we talked about COVID almost exclusively. Everybody, that's all they wanted to talk about. You know, my nursing home is shut down. Oh, well, we've already had 20 people die in our assisted living facility. And someone else would say, my kid is a doctor and he's in the ER and I'm so nervous about him. What I find now is that people occasionally talk about COVID, but we're now talking about how do we serve each other? How do we deal with the world as it is now? I have a very dear friend who is a pastoral care theologian, and she says that there are a couple of issues that are happening right now for us. One of the issues is we're dealing with multiple traumas, right? So a traumatic event can be a singular event, or it could be an event that's spread over. It's a cumulative issue around trauma. So we're having multiple traumas at the same time. Obviously, the first and foremost is the one that most of us feel the most connected to, and that is the issue of COVID-19. It is not just an American issue. It is a global issue. It is a pandemic that in this nation, and I'm going to get slightly political, we could have done so much better on. We could have lessened the number of deaths. We could have lessened the number of cases had we treated it with the severity and the respect that it was due. And we chose not to do that as a country. Our leadership did. So we've got that trauma going on, which means you couldn't get out of your house. It meant that businesses were going under. It meant folks weren't getting paid. It meant you couldn't buy toilet paper. You couldn't buy hand sanitizer. You couldn't buy soap. So all of those sort of traumas, so the individual and cumulative traumas that were happening around COVID. And then very quickly after that, we had the George Floyd shooting. And we had this eruption of sort of a bunch of different groups coming together finally to address the issue of racism and systemic racism and the problematic pieces that a lot of folks of color have with police. I have a nephew who's a cop. He's a good guy. I love him to death. But he says there are people in police departments all across the country who don't need to be there, who are biased, who are violent. And he said, if I could wipe my hand away and get rid of all those cops, I would, and it would be a different world. But what happened then is you have the trauma of the George Floyd shooting, which hit people of color much deeper than it did the Anglo community. But it was at a moment when we were already isolated from each other. And all we were doing was watching TV and keeping up with CNN. And we were on our laptops and seeing everything that was happening. And so it escalated, rightly so. It escalated from a local event in Minnesota to this global event, first national and then global event, talking about systemic racism. So we've got COVID going on as a traumatic event. We've got institutional systemic racism, police violence that is going on. And then on top of all that, we continue to not know what the end date is. A lot of times when you have a trauma, you're like, okay, we lost somebody, my grandfather died, we'll process this and then we'll move on. We have no end date on COVID. Yeah. And we have no sort of organized, systemic way right now of trying to deal with racism in our country. If that was everything, that would be way more than most of us could handle. But you put on top of that the fact that we cannot gather as community, the fact that a lot of folks who were unchurched didn't have then a religious institution or a church to go to when they were feeling hopeless and lost. And then the number of churches who have done a horrible job of staying connected with the world, or saying this was some kind of curse that we deserve, some evangelical conservative churches. So you put all those traumas on top of each other and it just continues to rise. And what I discovered early on is we had to figure out how to every day, every week, try to portray some level of hope, some level of optimism. So I have always been a social media person. My Facebook became sort of this pastoral care place. I would ask people, how you doing? And I would remind people it's okay if you're not okay. It's completely all right if you feel overwhelmed and completely at a loss about what you can and should do in the midst of all this. I put up, surveys. If you're on a desert island, what's the one book that you would want to have with you? What's your favorite ice cream? Just all kinds of things that sometimes would get a couple of hundred people commenting on it. Anything to try to say, yep, we can do some normal stuff. We can remember who we were and continue to honor those things. And it just sort of became a lifeline for myself and for others. So, you guys, your church has experienced the same kind of things, right? You've got the trauma of COVID and not being able to gather. You've got the trauma of Black Lives Matter and all of the political turmoil that becomes the third rail of the trauma. And that's the political and electoral situation we're in right now. So when people say I'm having trouble coping, I'm like, yeah, if you were coping okay, I would think there was something maybe wrong with you.
And you touched a wonderful, wonderful topic of giving hope during this multiple trauma. Yeah. And I checked your Facebook page and I found a wonderful quote, a few actually, that your favorite ones. And I want to read one, unless you know it by heart. So two especially got my attention, and one is exactly what you're talking about. So when I will say who wrote, who is this a quote from, you will probably laugh. But I think this is who you are, because this is what it says. One person scorned and covered with scars strove with their last ounce of courage to reach the unreachable stars, and the world was better for this.
Yeah, it's
And I
Don
could see
Quixote.
you doing that, constantly reaching up,
Yeah,
constantly looking up to those unreachable stars. And of course, this is Don Quixote who
yeah.
said that. So, in your life, pre-COVID, if you think about it, how many windmills did you have to fight?
Oh my goodness. Well, I know you have different levels of audience, different ages, and some are church and some are not. I was very honest when I started this by saying I have a wife. That's been one of the windmills. I grew up in the Methodist Church, became a United Methodist pastor, knowing that in United Methodism that was not allowed, but no one ever asked me the question. So I just continued in that pursuit until 2015, when it became legal for us to get married. We had been together at that point for 22 years.
Wow.
We're married in October of 2015, and we got engaged the November before that, but we didn't announce it until June, because we knew as soon as I announced it that I was going to be in trouble with the church. So we wrote out the announcement. We posted it on our Facebook pages at the same time, and it was up for 2.5 hours. And I got a message from my district superintendent saying that I had self-avowed publicly and that I would no longer be able to keep my ordination in the United Methodist Church. And, it was one of those moments where you think, this is a pretty big windmill. Do I want to go into a situation where I know I'm going to be put on trial, and my church and others would be wounded by that? So what I've tried to do over my life was to make choices that moved me forward and helped share that experience with others. So the reason we didn't do it until June, didn't announce it until June, was because I was behind the scenes doing the work to become UCC. And I knew that if I left the United Methodist Church, it was going to be really painful for my dad. My dad and I are very, very close. He was ordained as United Methodist pastor when he was like 26, something like that, 25. Served until he was 70 and retired then, but stayed part-time. And so my dad is 85 now, and he just stopped doing pastoral care calls 2 years ago for the church. And I called him and I said, Dad, I think I'm going to have to do something that you're going to be really upset about. And he said, tell me. So we talked for a little while, and I said, Dad, I can't stay United Methodist. And one of the reasons that I can't stay United Methodist, and he interrupted me and he said, Karen, I knew this was going to happen someday, and I'm ready. I want you to be able to be all of who you are and not worry about this anymore.
Wow.
And when he said those words, it was like this huge weight was lifted off my shoulders, because I kept thinking, if I leave the Methodist Church, it's going to wound him so deeply. And he turned around and said, the church has wounded you too deeply, and you cannot stay anymore. So, that's been a really big piece in my entire life. I've always tried to protect the underdog. I've always tried to get out front on issues, whether it was women's rights issue, marching in the women's marches throughout the years. I was young enough and old enough at the same time to work on the Ann Richards campaign when she was running for governor, and got to go to her inaugural ball. And I've worked for immigrants' rights. I've done all kinds of stuff throughout my career. I think the biggest issues for me over the last 5 years have been LGBTQ inclusion, immigration rights, and gun violence. Those are probably the three that I've spent the most time sort of, picketing with a group, gun shops that sell guns illegally to folks, and working for immigrants' rights and trying to get connection to folks who are going to Mexico and help support their ministry. And it's just, there are so many things in the world right now that it's not, we have not become the kingdom, not kingdom. I use kingdom because we're kin to one another, right? We have not created the kingdom that God wants. God wanted a world that accepted everybody, that loved everybody, that nourished everybody. If you go back to the early teachings of Judaism, it's about care for the last, the lost, the least, and the left behind. It's always about taking care of the orphan, taking care of the widow, taking care of those who are ill and unable to care for themselves. And you look at our society right now, and we're so far from that. And we're so far from that as a nation that continues to say we're a Christian nation. And that frustrates me because when Christ says feed the poor, we say that's Christianity. But when people in this day and age say feed the poor, it's socialism. And they sort of shut the door on that. So, man, I think I've tilted a lot of windmills in my life, and I continue to do so. I continue to work for the rights of all persons. We have done Black Lives Matter. We've marched over the last couple of months and years, and we did help do an interfaith service with our Jewish friends down the road in protest of George Floyd, and we continue to do those kind of events on a regular basis. I think there are times when my church says you're a little too political. And my response is, Jesus was political. Is if I did everything he did, you would really kick me out. So part of it is figuring out I guess for me, it's figuring out what your core values are, and then how do you live those out, right? So in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of a tumultuous election period, in the midst of racial and ethnic and all kinds of issues and financial difficulties, how do you cope? How do you continue to move forward? And there's two things that are primary to me. One is from the Old Testament. It's from the prophet Micah 6:8, where he says, "And what, O mortal, do I require of you, but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." And every time I think, is this a place that I should work? Is this a place that I should put my energy? I think, is that justice? Is that compassion and love? Is that walking with God? And if it is, I have to do it. That's what I'm charged to do. And the other is my ordination vows. When hands were placed on my head and they said, "Take thou authority and take the gospel into all the world," I was charged to do that. And I have tried vocationally to encourage every person I've ever pastored, every student I've ever taught. We have to share God's love. If you are living a life where folks look at you and say, "Ooh, I saw Christ today," or "I saw a Christian today," and they weren't mean, we've spread the gospel. So for me, coping, the number one thing through all of this was trying to stay as connected as I could be to God. And there were times that's been hard. I'm a pastor. I have a divinity degree. I have a PhD in liturgy and preaching. And there were times over the last 7 or 8 months when I could barely talk to God. I was so angry and frustrated. And I would remember, if God has shoulders, if you want to personify God, God's big enough to take it. I've said that to people my entire career. God can handle your anger. God can handle your questions. The statement of faith at my church says, we believe in a faith where questions are just as important as the answers. And where living the mystery is a greater thing than accepting tradition and doctrine just on its own. So I got people who are questioning God on a regular basis. And I want to encourage that. So when I get frustrated and I just kind of rail at God and say, how can this be happening right now? Why is this happening? Where is the love? Where is the compassion? Where is the justice for our siblings of color? Where is the justice for women who are terrified about what's going to happen if the more conservative Supreme Court changes their accessibility to just basic health care? Where is the justice for queer folks who are wondering if their marriages will no longer have value, will be negated, or they will change the rule for everyone moving forward. Where's the justice when Black and brown young people, particularly men, go out into the community and they're risking death simply by walking around, being Black or brown? My blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid from Yekaterinburg, Russia, he doesn't get pulled over or asked, but his friends do, and that's not fair.
And that's not fair. And I'm glad you brought up this kind of history moment, that your son is from my hometown.
That's right.
And that, yes, and that's when I've learned about it almost like 22 years ago. But he was, of course, probably 21 years ago. I just jumped because it's like, what in the whole world? How did it happen that you flew to my hometown when I wasn't there for 20 plus years? So you went there before me. But so that's how are you as a theologian, but first of all, as a mother and a daughter? You talked about your father, who's 85 now, and as I understand, following you on Facebook, he has quite serious problems health-wise. Then you have your son in college, and this is all in the midst of COVID, when you have to show your non-anxious presence to your members. So here we have these feelings of anger and frustration, and then I'm not sure how far you live from your father, but could you elaborate a little more on that? How you stretch yourself as a sandwich generation person? How do you handle it all?
Well, sometimes better than others. Let's just be honest about that, right? So my dad lives halfway across the country. My mom and dad live in Arlington, Texas. And they live about 5 minutes from my older sister. And so she's able to be there with them a lot. My dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer about 12 years ago. And as of this last month, he was on his third bout of bladder cancer. And it is extremely aggressive bladder cancer that has continued to come back. They had decided that chemo was not going to be an option anymore, and they were going to just do surgery periodically to try to clean it out and hope it didn't breach the wall. But they've decided that they want to try chemo one more time. Their new surgeon has a new chemo procedure that they're hoping will work. Being that far away from him is really hard. My mother, it's taken a big toll on her. She was sick and in the hospital in January. I have not been home to see my parents since December. So I missed my mom's big hospital stay in January. The weekend that we locked down, I had plane tickets to go to Texas. And I had to call my travel agent and cancel my trip because at that point, I didn't know who had it, who didn't have it. They were saying, don't go anywhere near people who are older, who have underlying health conditions. So my dad has gone through 2 surgeries since I've been home. And this will be his second chemo series. I just thank God for technology, right? We have a Zoom family session every Thursday night, and the nieces and the nephews and the siblings and the in-laws all get on and we talk and we can check in. It's so much different when before we had these kind of webcams and you could talk to each other. I would have to assume, hearing my dad's voice or hearing my mom's voice, oh, they sound kind of tired, or wow, I wonder if they're doing okay. I can FaceTime them, or we can Zoom together, and I can say, Dad, you're looking a little tired. What's going on? Dad, have you been taking naps? Have you been resting very well? So being at a distance is really, really hard. My biggest fear the last couple of surgeries was that it was going to breach the wall and he was going to be sort of even worse off than he is right now. He feels pretty good for right now. He's probably about 85%, but he's 85 years old. He's got some macular degeneration. His hearing's not great. And but other than that, man, he gardens every day. He goes out and takes care of his plants, and he reads Louis L'Amour books. I think he's read every single Louis L'Amour book like 20, 25, 30 times. He just continues to read the series. So that I only see him through FaceTime or Zoom. But my sister will call me and she'll say, okay, I was over there yesterday and here's how he looked. It looks like he's lost some more weight. And so I've been able to sort of keep up with him that way. Our son lives in a house with 5 other guys down by Temple. Temple's here in Philadelphia. And he was going to class. He was working. So he didn't come home because my wife has a compromised immune system. So we've only seen him more recently. I think it was a couple of months we only saw him twice, and it was eating in a parking lot across, we took some food down and had a picnic in a parking lot 6 feet apart. So the interesting thing is I'm someone who likes to be with my family. I like Shelby to be here with us, right? Shelby Mikhail, he's got that good Russian name. I want to be able to hug him. I want to be able to hear his stories. And that's been harder. I want to be with my mom and dad. Usually by this point in the year, I will have already been to Texas twice and planning a 3rd trip. And now I haven't been since December. But, I think there's a lot of generations who are struggling with how do they take care of people at a distance? How do you take care of your parents? And my parents will continue to say they're very independent. They don't need taken care of yet. But there are some things they can't do the way they used to be able to do. And I am so blessed by my older sister being there. My little sister is about 5 hours away, so she's gone a couple of times and kept her mask on and stayed with them for the weekend. But I just don't know when I'm going to feel safe getting on an airplane and then being in a room with my parents. I would just be so nervous. So I think coping is we text a lot. We have a family text message thread that goes off probably 30 times a day. So, technology's great. And it also sucks because I'd much rather be in the room with them than I think.
Absolutely.
It's hard.
It's probably like your members who said that when you had this streaming, they felt your presence like you're right there. And so does it mean that when you talk to your family, instead of flying, when you will be not able to, first of all, be safe yourself, and then not bringing the virus to your family, but also the quality time probably will be not as good as when you talk via social media, right? Channels and platforms.
And one of the things I've discovered is that, we have 4 little great grandkids. There's 2 4-year-olds and 2 23-month-olds. And they love seeing themselves on the camera. They love seeing themselves on TV. And so we FaceTime with them at least once a month or once a week, and they'll call. They figured out how to FaceTime people. And McKenna called one time. She's 4. And she pushed the button for her mom and she pushed a picture of me. And when she called, I said, hey. And I said, who is this? And she said, this is McKenna. And I said, where are you? And she said, I'm in the closet. And I said, why are you in the closet? She said, I stole mommy's phone because I wanted to say hi. And, when you have that possibility of connecting with people with this real emotion, that's what I think is so important. I'm a preaching professor. I teach worship in some settings, and I watch some feeds of other pastors, and it feels like they're so disconnected from what's going on. And so I picture this is where the Deutschleys sit, and this is where the Simons sit, and this, and we're having our first in-person inside tomorrow as well.
Okay.
We've been doing an outside plus our live stream for a couple of months, but we're going to do our first inside, limited capacity to see how it goes tomorrow. So this is your first time inside tomorrow too?
No, we had open services for a while in person and online. And of course, back in April and May and June, we had pre-recorded services. But we were lucky, as you were, that we received the grant. And then now we have equipment in the church that we stream and straight to Facebook and the website. But we had to close it for a month because we had one lady who got COVID, and she we thought that maybe it was some interaction, so we kind of stopped it for a while.
Yeah.
And tomorrow is All Saints Day,
Yes.
Sunday, and then also, of course, we soon we will have our Commitment Sunday, probably as you have. And so we thought it's people really missed each other, so we will give it a try and see how long we can go without having any cases.
Yeah.
So it's really scary because in Missouri now the number of cases goes up, and so like in some cases, Wisconsin had the same, like people thought they were in the Bible, and then the bubble burst,
Yeah.
and lots of cases like in New York and Texas at some point. But the thing is that still coming back to this question, where is God in all this? Because you
Yeah.
see, people, like I have questions, like, for example, did God start this COVID as punishment? Did God allow that because people, the humanity was so sinful? So how would you, as a theologian, answer that question? And I invite Scott and Candy to ask these questions because it's a big thing. And of
Yeah.
course, many churches, many pastors preach it like a damnation.
Yes.
Unless we change, unless we confess, this virus cannot stop. Other pastors, for example, say God is with us. God will not allow this to happen. So very radical difference in approaching how
Yeah.
to preach that. So how would you answer? Where's God in all this? Why did it
Yeah.
happen?
So how you understand how this happened, and you want to put sort of a theological bent on it, you have to think about how you understand God, right? And
Right.
so some people understand God as this traffic cop up in the sky that is, zapping you with a radar gun every time you do something wrong, and God is keeping track of all those tickets. Some people believe God is this benevolent clockmaker who made this beautiful and intricate clock, got it going, set it down, and said, "Here you go. You have to keep it running." If my theology is that God is a traffic cop keeping track of stuff, I'm going to think about the world very differently. I was talking to, I think it was a confirmand, one of our confirmation kids, probably 10 years ago. And I said, if you could tell me an image of how you understand God, what would it be? And she said, well, my grandma described God one time as this marionette, right? This person who does the puppets, the marionette. And so if you want a hand to go up, you flip it and the marionette's hand goes up, right? So they're counterbalanced. So, and I thought, that is a horrible image for God. Really, I was like getting red in the face trying to figure out what to say in response to this. Because for me, it's not about God saying you get cancer and you don't. You have a car wreck and you're not going to live, and you're going to have a car wreck and you're going to have a miraculous save. Or your child is going to be stillborn and this other child is going to make it to adulthood and become president of the United States. I just don't think that's how God works. I don't think God picks and chooses who God is going to favor, right? I believe God is this benevolent God who loves all of us, who wants all of us to get along, who wants all of us to feel love and grace and acceptance. And it's like this master clockmaker who made this intricate thing and said, here it is. I'm going to watch and see what happens. So for me, what happens when COVID happens and someone says, why did God let this happen? My answer is, God did not either let it happen and God did not make it happen. It is something that happened because of the way we're living in the world right now. We have been so abusive to each other and the viruses that are a part of us. We have not trusted one another. We have not worked as a team in so many ways. And so for me, when someone says, my grandmother just died of COVID, will you do her funeral? And I say, absolutely. And they'll say, but I don't know that I want you to mention God because I think God did this. Mm-hmm. My first response is to say, oh, I am so sorry you lost your grandmother. And I am so sorry you have anger at God. You have every right to be angry. But I believe to the core of my being that God didn't do this. There was a theological sort of conundrum that happened around the Holocaust as well. There were some Jews who said, where was God? Where was God? This huge thing happening, where was God? And there were a lot of Jews that lost their faith and could not even believe in a benevolent God anymore, in Jehovah in any way. But there was this whole other group that said God was there with us. God held our hands as our loved ones walked into the chambers, and God wept when the fire of their bodies hit the air. I believe that God loves us, and that in no way would God say, I want to punish you people right now. We have for decades have said, if there's a hurricane coming, it's because gay people are getting married. If there's a hurricane coming, it's because it's New Orleans and they gamble. There's a tropical storm coming, and it's because it's at Atlantic City and they gamble as well. We've got an earthquake. Well, California is too liberal, so God wanted to destroy them. And I just say, I'm sorry, that's not the way the world works. We live in a world that is complex, that is intricate. And sometimes we do damage to the ways that we're connected to one another, and all hell breaks loose. If we had responded to COVID in the way I believe we could have and should have, we'd be in a different place right now. Mm-hmm. Do I believe that God caused a single person with COVID to die? Absolutely not. Do I believe that God held them and welcomed them every step of the way towards their death or their recovery? Absolutely. Do I believe it's okay for righteous indignation to say our government and the governments of the world failed us in preparing us for this? They failed us in responding to it. And I could say, I'm angry at you. And it is a righteous anger, because my God says, what immortal do we require? We require for you to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. Where was the justice? Where was the kindness? And where did we walk with God? God's walking with us all the time. So when I know my dad is going in for a chemo treatment, I will post it on my Facebook page and say, hey, please pray. My dad's going into chemo. It's not to try to get attention to me. It's because I believe that when we as communities come together, when we join our voices, when we join our prayers, when we join our hearts and our minds, we can do just about anything. God has put the medical facility there for my dad through all the people that devised it and had the possibilities to do it. And the medical field is advanced in so many ways now that, 20 years ago, he would not have survived this far. That's the way that God has gifted this intricate world, and we did something great with it. But yeah, Lydia, I hear it. I hear people saying, I can't believe God did this to us, or I can't believe God let this happen. And I just have to say, I don't believe that God let it happen. I think our governments let it happen. I think the failure of our institutions let it happen. Sorry, Candy, you were going to say something.
I have a question for you. Yeah. I just have a question I'd like for the three of you to consider, really. In Thessalonians, there's scripture, something about this is God's will for you at this time, or something like that. I should have looked at that before I asked the question, but it kind of led me to believe that maybe I'd like to know what hope you see coming out. This has been a terrible situation. Yeah. Like you said, we had multiple things going wrong, multiple crises that we had to deal with at the same time. But yet I feel like God is walking it with us right now. Yeah. So what good can come out of where we've been and what we've been through as a group?
Wow. Well, I think as a group, we have come to understand and appreciate the helpers of our society in ways we might not have before. Nurses and doctors, ER technicians, janitors, and cafeteria workers in our first line facilities, hospitals, nursing homes, those kind of things. I think we have learned once again the value of the helpers in those positions. I have said all along that some of the heroes of the COVID have been grocery store clerks and stock boys and truck drivers who have kept the food lines going. I think that teachers have received finally a level of respect that I don't think many have given them before, but it's been so interesting. I have a lot of teachers in my family. And in March and April and May, teachers were heroes. You know, they're going in and doing this Zoom stuff. And this fall, it was kind of like, okay, teachers, we want our kids to go back. So go into the classroom and figure out how to teach. So the problem is we've got these windows of opportunity, and sometimes we shut the door and don't let them fully happen. I do believe that folks have gotten closer to their families in a lot of ways. I talk to people all the time, and they say, you know, I haven't talked to my sister in years. We talk every week now to check in with each other. And social media and technology have all given us the opportunity to really be gathered together in ways we never have before. Some of my older members have figured out how to use the internet, have figured out how to go on Zoom and participate in Bible studies. And, you know, I think oh, wow, sort of the number of sort of traumas and crises that happen all at once. I think white America woke up. We have seen our siblings of color be damaged in the past by racism, whether it's systemic or individual, macro or microaggressions. But there was something about the George Floyd and then the Breonna Taylor and now the Walter Wallace case here in Philadelphia that has shined a light differently on it. And so my hope, even though this election is so divisive, I'm hoping we can find a way to come out of this where we do sort of live out Micah 6:8 more, you know, that we want justice to be not just for me and my son, but for justice to be for his Black friend who constantly gets followed in stores and constantly gets pulled over for driving in a neighborhood somebody thinks he shouldn't be driving through. So, you know, I hope some of those things will happen. I think the biggest thing I'm worried about right now is what's going to happen Wednesday of next week with the election on Tuesday. I don't know that we'll know by Wednesday. There's so many things that are going to potentials for elongating this election. But how do we come back together when we are so separate? I think if we listen to God and we begin to honor each other, maybe we can make some inroads in that and heal some of those wounds.
I hope so.
Yeah, me too.
I hope so. You have an interesting quote that I also really liked, because this is really reflects on how you live and also what you share today with. And this is from Rainer Maria Rilke. And it says, because nobody knows now what will happen even tomorrow. Nobody knows sometimes how to live the day. But your quote that you liked and shared on Facebook, I think leads us forward. And this is what it says. Leave the questions now, perhaps, then someday far in the future. You will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer. And Rainer Maria Rilke said it in 1903. Wow. And interesting that how prophetic this message is for our time. Yeah. We don't know. We just simply live day, one day at a time. Yeah. And then we start another day. We go to bed. We don't even know we will wake up healthy or we will get sick in the middle of the night and wake up with fever or start coughing or lose a smell and the sense of taste. Yeah. But the thing is that this prophetic vision calls us forward because we will know later how we live, what God has for us today. We will know what will happen to humanity, as well as you mentioned the election. We might not know on Wednesday, but we will know eventually. But so in all this, where's God?
I think God is within all of us. God is in us. God is enfolding us in God's arms. God is beside us and with us and walking with us in everything. That God is our constant voice that we can talk to and will respond in ways that we may not even understand. God is the heartstring that pulls us closer to other people. God is the intellect that helps us find ways forward. God is the spirit that gives us strength and passion and leads us to tilt at windmills. God is our feet and our hands that can do service for others, that can show compassion to the world, that can march and picket and pack food for those who are experiencing food insecurity. God is in our bodies and in our minds and in our souls and spurs us forward. So we are a part of that great divine. We are a part, that God's Spirit is a part of us. And if we keep moving forward every day saying, I'm going to live up to the best self I can today, and I may fail, and I may have to apologize to God for not living up to it fully, but I know God is with me, and I'm going to keep trying every day to live up to my best self. I'm going to try every day to show love and grace and compassion to others. I'm going to try every day to spread a little bit more hope and a little bit more joy. And maybe that'll impact somebody out there. Maybe a quote that I quote, or a picture that I post, or a video. I posted a video the other day of a little boy on the toilet and his dad just cracking up talking to each other. And I've gotten so many messages from people saying, I just needed to laugh. Thank you so much. So maybe the hope comes in sharing something completely ridiculous. Maybe the hope comes when our son came to visit, and Cindy had made some pumpkin bread, and he picked it up to go, and he said, "Oh, wait a minute, where's some plastic bags?" And I said, "It's in a plastic bag." And he said, "No, one of my friends is leaving to go home this week to vote. I want him to take some with him." And I thought, 21-year-old kid is about to get some free food to take home, and he thought, but I don't want Lucas to not get some. Mm-hmm. And if he got that from Sunday school, or from his parents, or from the world, that is a moment of kindness that I just had to smile inside and say, that's God. That's God. That's God.
And in this whole adventure that is called life, your personal life story is amazing, because, and that's how I think you and I connected absolutely in the most amazing way. When I first came to St. Paul School of Theology, I was still in Russia. And when we had that class a long time ago, I don't even remember which one, but just simply not knowing each other, but look where we are now.
I know.
And I think this is when we look back. Don't you think that each of us will look back maybe like even a year later, when everything, this madness is over, and we will say, thank God, like you just said, thank God you helped us to go through this. We are alive. And but today it's a gift. Thank God that we are alive, we are breathing, we can smell, and we can taste, feel. And our relatives, even my mom, for example, I'm in a very similar situation. I'm away from my mother, and my sister, like yours, is taking care of her. She's tired. She's a teacher, like you said. Thank you for saying that our teachers heroes now. They are always, but nobody ever before, they're underpaid, overstressed, not really the best health, but they continue teaching the future generation. And so imagine when you are 24/7 taking care of my mother, 85 years old as well, 86 now, and absolutely immobile. I'm so proud of your parents who say that, oh, we're fine, we're taking care of ourselves. Of course they can, but my mom is completely cannot even make a step, imagine. And so you have to constantly watch her, how she steps. But in the midst of that, God is there. God loves each of us, and God really nurtures us and protects us. And we will know it later. We will know it later. But this world is so small. This world is too small to fight and to hate and to envy. And like you and I, American and Russian, and look, we found a common language. But also when you talked about how love for God is, first of all, goes to those who are like underdogs, people who are minority, people who are outcasts. I was so privileged in Russia. I probably would never understand what I understand now back there, because my parents were well educated. They were having a better income than many of my friends' parents had, and also I was white. It's kind of ridiculous to say it about Russia, but we had Tatars, we had Georgians, Armenians, minorities. And my husband, who is sitting right there drinking coffee or tea, he knows that my mom's most favorite saying is,
Yes.
the an uninvited guest is worse than a Tatar.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So imagine, and we had our neighbor, Aunt Raya, we called her, and every time she comes and the doorbell rings, and mom like knew intuitively that was our neighbor, and she would say, an uninvited guest is worse than a Tatar. And ironically, our neighbor was a Tatar.
Wow.
And she was always coming to borrow something and never returning. An iron or a pot always disappeared. And that's what mom had a lot of reason probably not to like that. But I would never understand the life of a minority if I did not come to the United States. To become, first of all, a woman pastor with an accent in small churches where women pastors did not serve before.
Right.
That was quite like what you shared. So
Yeah.
it took me a while to start understanding that, oh my, I'm no longer privileged. Actually, I have to fight for every breath sometimes, and economically and also socially to be accepted. I've learned even to say that when people say, where's your accent from? I say, from Louisiana. Because I was afraid to say from the Soviet Union, at that time. And so many things like that. But I was really learning to live in this world that is not always friendly to minority people, to minority groups. And that's why I think it really, the benefit of that, God expanded my heart. And God expanded my mind. And I started hearing the voices that I would never really hear. And my husband and I, we talk about racism in the family, and we talk about what is going on around, and how interesting it is that how intricate is God's world and His world, that we learn to really understand and hear each other, because He's an American as well. And a white guy, like he says, like how, Scott, you say, I'm a white,
Middle-aged, middle class white male.
Right. And
there's a lot of you out there.
There are, and I take blame for everything.
Right. But that's why, but it's interesting, Scott, to see how you grow, because with aging, when, your actually job security is not as safe, even for the white man, and also how in your field, like he is IT senior engineer, right, at the Garmin, and so and how many young people come and they have high professional skills even without going to college, because they're so good in computers. So what I try to say is that we all need to hear each other. Right. We all need to understand that God's love is for all of us. We are minority or we are majority, or we are left or we are right, but God loves everybody. And that's what I really appreciate what you shared with us today, because without sharing God's love, like you invited us all, we have to share God's love during this time of multiple trauma.
So maybe the uninvited guest is a child of God in search of justice and compassion and hope. And if we look that way, then everybody who comes in our path is a child of God, and we can reach out and love them. So maybe that's the best thing that come out of this, is that
Amen.
we see that.
Amen to that. Thank you. Oh, thank
Amen.
you. Thank you for that. And thank you, Karen and Candy and Scott, for being here with us today. Hello to Cindy and Shelby. And may God keep you safe and keep us all
thank you.
safe.
And you guys as well.
Thank
you so much for inviting me to be here today.
You.
Thank you,
absolutely. Bye.
Bye.